And these are really great tool to use for your practices, whether you're doing them just to have them for mantra or meditation. It really helps to envelop, and it's said to bring a sense of the divine and a connection to the subtle realms. And it's part of the reason why you always see lights or candles in temples, even in churches, anywhere. So it's a really important thing to have if you're doing practices at home. And the other important thing too is, while we're saying ghee candle, really there's a difference between ghee and clarified butter. Clarified butter is just basically melted butter. Real ghee comes from a cultured substance, such as yogurt we used to make it with. It's something you should know. For candles, it's not a big idea if it's just melted butter, but if you do want real ghee for ingestion, you're going to want real ghee, ideally. And we'll cover that in a different lesson, but you should be aware that there is a difference between the two, because a lot of what's being sold out there as ghee is not really traditional ghee according to Ayurveda and what the texts talk about. So just something to note. Now, to get started, we're going to just melt our butter first. We have just 4 sticks in there. A couple tips to make this. You want to get a thick pot, and you can see here it's fairly thick. You don't want a thin or flimsy pot, but something with at least maybe a 1/4 inch thickness is ideal, so that you don't melt your butter or scar it too much. As well as, while we have an electric stove here, electric stoves are not so ideal. Ideally, if you're doing any kind of Ayurveda cooking, fire flame is the best. But in this day and age, that doesn't always, we don't always come by that. So we work with what we can. But and depending on your setup, it's going to make a big difference as far as how much heat you need. But in general, try to keep it at a very low flame, usually a little lower than you think you need it, so that the butter melts slowly and evenly over time. And so basically, once you get your butter melted, you're just going to keep skimming off the top of the butter of any film, any white residue, which is really all the fats burning off. And you can save that, and you can use that too on your toast, but it's pretty heavy fat to use. And you're going to want to keep melting the butter until basically you don't see any more bubbles or any kind of disturbance in the liquid. And you'll know that it's going bad if it's kind of a dark brownish color, and it might start smelling a little off. So you want to be somewhat careful with that. For the candle, it's not as big of big as a deal if it does burn a little bit, but you still want that nice color, and you still want the candle to look good for your practices and your space. So it might take some used to doing if you haven't done this process, but it's not that hard if you follow those simple steps of keeping low heat and get a fairly thick pan to use. Now, the second thing you're going to need is a wick. And to do the wick, you can go on eBay or any kind of website, and you can just buy a straight wick, which is basically kind of like yarn. And it's pretty cheap. You can get a big bundle of it, and you'll have plenty of wick for many years to come when you're doing this. In order to make the wick, you put it in another pot, and you're going to just want a pot reserved for this purpose. And you get a little bit of wax from, maybe if you have an old candle around, or you can get blocks of wax too, but most of us have old kind of used up wax, which you can save for this process. But all you're going to do is cut off a strip of the wick, melt the wax a little, and quite simply just put the wick right into the pan, coat it with some wax. And then as soon as that's done, what you want to do is take that wick, that kind of hot, waxy wick, and right away put it in a freezer. And this is going to help to harden the wax quickly and efficiently, so that it's even for the candle itself. And then once you have that, you're going to want to strain out the clarified butter once that's all ready, and you can strain it into some type of container. I generally use these glass containers, and these are nice because I find they're easier to use for a tratak practice, and they hold quite a bit of ghee. So these candles will last me, a month or upwards of time for for practices, or maybe shorter if I'm doing some kind of extended pujas or something. But in general, I do like this setup with the glass. It allows me to see through it and things like that. And once again, you can get this from any basic candle making supply store, 'cause some of these home stores have things like this, so it's pretty easy to come by. But ideally, too, you can look up to get a deepa or some kind of brass or copper object. They sell these more traditional vessels, which are really ideal to have a proper traditional ghee candle. And they cost a little more, but they can be worth it depending on your inclination. So it's up to you what you want to use. And then you want to just let the ghee sit there until it cools off considerably and slowly starts to harden. And this will take upwards of a few hours, so you just want to let it go there. And when you see that the ghee has been cooled off sufficiently, you can take the wick and you just place it into a thumbtack with a flat bottom onto it. And it's a little tricky, but basically you're just taking that pointed piece of the thumbtack and shoving it into the bottom of the wick so that it goes right in the center, and that'll hold it in place. And you just place that down carefully into the ghee, which is pretty semi-solid, so it should move through the ghee pretty easy, and that'll help the wick stand up as it melts on your altar or in your meditation space. And after that, that's it. You're done. It's a pretty simple process, and if you have any questions about it, let me know. But it should be pretty straightforward. Might take a little doing to get the wax and everything in order, but it's a fun process. It's easy to do, and there are other substances you can use. Some people use different types of oils and things like that, which can get pretty specific depending upon what kind of deities you're worshiping, or what type of remedies you're doing. People will actually recommend different types of oils to attract different types of energies, but overall, the ghee candle is highly recommended across the board to use, and it's worth doing too because it gives a very soft glow. It's not as harsh as a candle. So if you are doing a Tratak practice, then this is really the ideal way to go for that practice, as opposed to any other kind of candle, which will work, but these have a certain resonant, soft quality because of the butter, because of the ghee being used, that you really can't find anywhere else. And they last long, and they're great tools to have. You also, one other thing to note is try to use organic ghee if possible. They're bringing anything into a meditative or spiritual place, you want to try to make sure it's as pure as possible. So get as pure ingredients with the butter you're getting for your ghee, and also make sure that any utensils you're using to make these, so like the utensil you're using to melt the butter or to make the wax, or even the candle holder, make sure that that's all kept kind of in a separate place. So if you have a separate plastic box to hold that in, as well as you have a separate sponge to wash those items with, that'll help maintain the purity of the items that you're going to be bringing into your meditation space. And if you follow that for everything you bring in that space, you would notice it's a subtle difference, but it's very important, because the more you get into meditation and these deeper practices, you have to be sensitive to these things if you really want to get to the full benefit and a full, deep, really yogic experience, which is hard to come by these days. But we're all doing what we can, and yeah, I hope this has been helpful, and have fun.